we are here at Unity of Springfield on Sunday, June 25th. This is our New Thought World Religion class, and we are completing our discussion today on trusting the process of change, which is brought to us by lessons from Finding Yourself in Transition by Robert Burnett. And we'll go ahead and start with an opening prayer. I'm going to get comfortable, close your eyes. We say thank you to Spirit for bringing us this far in life's journey, through endings and losses, through the void and the dark nights of the soul, clearing the way for us to begin anew. We are grateful for the wisdom and strength we have accessed through our connection with the divine. We say thank you for the presence that guides us now and will continue to do so as we manifest our dreams and desires. May our new beginnings not only bring us joy, but also serve the world. And so it is. Thank you, God. All right. So last time, there's the book covers, two different printings. So you got two different covers to look for if you're interested in finding this book by Robert Burnett. So we have talked about change. We have gone through the 3 stages of transition. So we began with discussing endings, which was the letting go of the old before we're ready to embrace the new. Then we moved on to discussing the void, where we shed the husk of our old identity or the false self that we've been conditioned to believe is the me. And today we're going to complete with talking about new beginnings. So that's the external circumstances of our life reflect the internal transformation that has already taken place. So as we talked about last week, Burnett states that our experience in the void inevitably leads us to an encounter with the I am within. And that encounter empowers us with the wisdom and strength we need to make a new beginning, whether we think we're ready for it or not. So he says we might tend to think of a new beginning in terms of the external change, but it's actually beginning with the internal change. And it could be experienced as a subtle inner shift, a new sense of awareness or readiness. He also says, look in your dreams for dreams of births or moving into a new house, discovering something new, or dreams that a new life is emerging. He also says we're sometimes not fully aware of the new beginning until we begin to experience the external changes in our life. So sometimes those subtle shifts are happening within, and we may not be fully aware of them, and then things on the outside start to change, and that's when we go, oh, hey, wait a minute, what's happening here? And that's okay. Sometimes we're making very intentional shifts on the inside, and so we're anticipating that new beginning also. And so that's what he says. It could be expected or unexpected, but as we pray for guidance and divine order, trusting in God at work in our life, the new beginning will occur at exactly the right time and in exactly the right way. He moves on to talk about one of the best ways to prepare for a new beginning is to discover your soul's deepest desire, and that all true new beginnings will be some expression of our soul's desire. And so he says, how do we discover this? It's a personal thing, and there's no formula for how you figure out what your soul's desire is or how you move into a new beginning. But he gives us some questions that we could ask ourselves or meditate on that might facilitate some discovery. And so those are the questions that are on the screen. So what is it I have always enjoyed doing? What has always come naturally for me? What have I felt naturally drawn or attracted to? What would I do with my life if I were not concerned with money? What would I do if I knew I could not fail? If I were to die today, what would feel unfinished in my life? And what is it that is so important to me that I would risk everything in order to achieve or experience it? It was interesting to me, those questions. If you have not done, just flit it out of my head. Prosperity Plus. That's like, it's Mary Morrissey. It's all I could think was her name. So if you haven't been into a Prosperity Plus class, this is kind of what you spend the entire time in the Prosperity Plus class getting at. These are the questions that we ask ourselves through that whole process. And I hope to be doing one of those in the next couple of months, if that's something that interests you. So what do we think about those questions? Did any of them really jump out at you? All of them.
All of it. Yeah, all of it.
Okay.
That last one's a little bit.
Yeah, I felt the same, Albie. That the last one, what is it that is so important to me that I would risk everything in order to achieve or experience it? Yeah.
What would you sell? What's the pearl that you would sell everything for?
Yeah.
That's kind of what that's saying.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
I know. I was the same way when I was reading through it, and then when I was typing that out, I was like, I don't have an answer. I don't know what that would be, and I wondered if I was trying to put it in too literal of terms, like wanting it to be a specific something instead of just a broader experience.
Does he expound on that?
No, he just kind of gives these questions. I mean, he does a little bit, but it's more, this is where he says it's not really a formula. It's just, these are some suggestions of like a journal prompt or a meditation prompt or just something you could sit with and see what comes up for you. And so it really depends on like where your higher self goes with that question, is what you're going to get out of it, I guess. So he says, as with the other stages, a new beginning brings its own set of challenges. So it's a change. No matter how much we consciously desire change, there's always part of us that doesn't want to change, right? Like that's part of our human experience. And I don't know if anyone else has ever been like just so determined, like, oh, things have got to change, and then the change happens and you're like, whoa, put the brakes on, like what's happening? I wasn't ready for all of this. And that's kind of what he's saying, is we're in this constant state of our higher self is desiring to change, to grow, to sit more fully into who we are here to be. And in our humanness, we get a little nervous when that actually starts to happen, especially if it's happening at a rapid rate. So he says we may unconsciously resist the new beginning because it puts us in unfamiliar territory. We might start to feel unsure of ourselves, might make us feel a little awkward or vulnerable. We might have a fear of being unprepared or inadequate for the task at hand. And he does go back and talks about, he uses the Exodus story throughout this whole text. And, he says that's much like Moses when God is telling Moses he's going to do all these things. Me? Who, me? I'm supposed to lead people out of slavery. I'm supposed to traipse them around the wilderness for 40 years and I'm supposed to lead them to the promised land. Are you sure that you've picked the right guy? And so he says that's the kind of experience we sometimes have when these big changes that are leading us to something that is our soul's desire start to happen. We have that moment of our humanness feeling inadequate. Did you have a thought, Mary?
Yeah, that's when I start having the dream, because I used to do theater, and anytime I feel unprepared for something that's about to happen, I have a dream that I'm in a play and I'm standing backstage and I'm about to go on and I have no idea what the play is or who I am in the play or any of my lines. And I'm looking through a script really fast, trying to find the first page where I have lines and what the heck is supposed to be happening. Always had that dream when I feel unprepared about something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a similar dream. I always show up to class and I don't have anything done that I'm supposed to have to get. Anyway, that's what I was going to mention. I was going to mention with the Moses story too. That particular myth is one of my favorites because it was like this deity was calling him to do something and he had to speak. And he's like, oh, I can't speak. I can't do that part. And in that myth, his brother came into the picture and did the speaking for him. And for me, that's always been like, oh, well, if this is what I'm actually supposed to do, I have all of the support that I need to accomplish that. And so I think that's, in the Exodus story, that's the biggest thing to understand with the Exodus story as well. We may be called to do something, but none of us are called to do everything, to do what we're supposed to do. We're not called to do it alone. We're not called to do it without support. And that's the thing is being receptive to the support makes the transition much easier.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. He says a new beginning also creates a need for us to make new commitments, which is not always an easy thing to do. So it challenges us to take some concrete action, to be disciplined, and sometimes even sacrifice parts of our old self in order to see this new beginning realized. And again, our humanness, those commitments sometimes bring thoughts that failure is a possibility. And if we have triggers about failure that we're carrying around with us or unhealed memories from the past, that's when it all decides to surface, right? So we have to move through that and let go of that in order to experience our new beginning as well. And so he says we really have to be willing to risk our old idea of self to invest in a vision of a new self that is closer to the desires of our soul. And so we return to the Exodus story. And so if you remember, we left off after the people had created the golden calf and Moses had melted it down and ground it up and put it in the water for them to swallow. And that signified a releasing of the old by melting it down into our consciousness, assimilating it through our awareness, acceptance, and forgiveness, and allowing it. So the Israelites were then led into the wilderness on the borders of Canaan, the promised land. And Moses was instructed to send 12 spies into the land to scout and report back to the people. Joshua and Caleb led the scouting party, and they were gone for, you guessed it, 40 days. The story is full of things that happened in 40 days and 40 years. So when they returned, Joshua and Caleb gave their report. And so they said, "We came to the land to which you have sent us. It flows with milk and honey, yet the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large." And this is from the book of Numbers, chapter 13. The other spies' report was much more pessimistic, and it spread fear amongst the people, because they reported, "The land is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great stature, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them." So instead of, you've got Joshua and Caleb, 2 of the 12, saying something that's not so scary, but 10 of the 12 saying something far more nefarious, right? And so the people again are filled with fear and start talking about, well, again, let's just return to Egypt. We know the deal there. We had food. It wasn't the greatest, but we knew what the deal was. Moses, and remember, Moses represents the I Am, once again says, remember, trust in Spirit. Spirit is with you. Spirit's been with you this whole way and provided everything that you needed. But the people are freaked out by this message, and they just cannot get past it. And so, after repeatedly fulfilling his promises to the people who still would not trust, the Lord decreed that no one over the age of 20 except for Joshua and Caleb would enter the promised land. Instead, they would be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years until the last of those over 20 had died and a new generation had been born and was ready to enter the promised land. Well, as you can imagine, these people who had been brought out of slavery, had spent 40 years, had gone through the parted Red Sea, had been wandering around for all of this time with Moses, and had gone through all these trials and tribulations. The thought of hearing that it would be another 40 years and that none of them would even make it into the promised land. Like, here they are, they're right on the borders, and they're going to wander around for another 40 years and not make it to the goal of where they wanted to be. They were not happy with this. Sorry, I lost my place here. And so it was more than some of them could take. And so a small group decides to take matters into their own hands. They say, I'm not doing this. I'm not wandering around for 40 more years. I'm not going to die out here and only know that my children will be the ones that go into the promised land. And so they took up arms and marched into Canaan, but without Moses behind them, without feeling the presence of spirit in that moment, they were easily defeated. So the rest of the people for the next 40 years wander around in the wilderness. And after a time had elapsed, they once again come to the edge of the promised land. And so by this time, the old generation has died and a new generation has been born and been raised, knowing that at some point they're going to come back to the promised land and they will gain entry. So Moses gathered this new generation. He made sure they knew the laws and blessed their tribes. And then he turned leadership over to Joshua, who eventually led them into the promised land. Moses was called up to the mountains where he could view the promised land, but died without ever stepping foot in it. So again, you've got Moses, who's brought the people all this way. He's said to have lived 120 years waiting for this promised land, this event to happen, but he's not allowed to go in with them. He instead is directed to turn over leadership to Joshua and have the people go into the promised land.
I kind of feel like this is almost where our country is right now. You know, it's like we have all of this fear that's just being spewed and spewed and spewed to motivate people to do certain things. And then you've got some other people back here going, wait a minute, that's not true. And this generation coming up, you know, are going, no, we're not going to abide by this crap that you guys have been doing for all of these years. And look what's happening with this. And why is this happening? We finally got people going, wait, why? Why can't we have free college? Why can't we have where everybody gets health care? You know, and they're not standing for it. And so, but then you've got all these the old people who want to get into the promised land and still want that power going, well, yeah, but no, you can't do this. So we're going to spread all this fear to make sure that you still comply and that we still get to do what we want to do. And it feels like that's exactly where our country is right now.
Sounds like maybe you're seeing this story as a metaphor for spiritual awakening and consciousness evolution. Yeah. And so that's what he says, is he's like, if we take this all literally, it seems really painful and unfair, right? Like all these trials and tribulations and all of this. But he says, again, if we look at it as a metaphysical illustration, we see that although the children of Israel were at the threshold of the promised land or the new beginning, they weren't yet ready to enter. And so sometimes we can see a new beginning, or we see a promised land, but in consciousness, we're not yet ready to fully enter into that. And so he says it's not uncommon that within the void, we encounter an opportunity that appears to be a new beginning. We might try to take matters into our own hands and force it to happen. But like the Israelites, this only delays our progress because we are not the version of ourselves that is necessary to move into that new way of being. And so we have to spend 40 years in the wilderness. Remember, we talked about 40 years, this magical 40 years is kind of just the time it takes, the time that is necessary for whatever transition is happening. And so this idea of the old generation having to die out for a new generation to come into being is that process of transformation taking place. And sometimes it would take longer than we would like. So sometimes we are sitting there and we are faced with a knowing that it's going to be 40 years before we get there, right? Like we have some internal knowing and we say, oh, I don't want to wait. I want it to happen now. And that's what this story is kind of illustrating for us, is that things unfold in their own time, and we have to be ready for those transitions, because if we try to force it and jump in to something that our consciousness isn't ready for, that we are not the version of ourselves that is needed, then we will often, just like the Israelites who tried to go in and force their way, they were easily defeated. And they didn't reach the goal either. Not to say that you won't get there, it's that setback or that regression that will happen, and then you have to take the time that it takes to evolve into that version of consciousness.
And I think that's where we get really discouraged when we go through that and we think we're ready, and then we have that failure, and that's where having that spiritual base comes into play. Because if you don't have that base, if you don't have that foundation, then you go, well, I tried, and then you don't try again. Don't allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to try again and have that faith to step out.
So in this story, the trusting that we are supported, that Spirit is for us all the time, is that when we're thrown back into the wilderness for 40 years, instead of saying, oh, I failed, this is, for the birds, I'm not going to try anymore. When you get thrown back in the wilderness going, oh, okay. So Spirit is telling me that I wasn't yet ready for that. And so what is it that I need to do? Who is it that I need to become? What is desiring to express through me so that I might be ready the next time I encounter that new beginning? He also addresses the idea of Moses not being allowed into the promised land. And he says, it simply wasn't his job. His function was to lead people out of Egypt, through the wilderness, and to the promised land. And he talks about the name Moses has one meaning that means to draw out. And so the Moses in this story symbolizes the part of our consciousness that is leading us out of the old life and guiding us through the void and bringing us face to face with the new beginning. So it's not that, it's not the function of that guide to then go into the new beginning with us. It's the I am that is moving us towards the new beginning. And he says it was Joshua who led the people into the promised land. Joshua is derived from the word Jehovah, meaning I am that I am. And so Joshua was a military leader, a warrior, a man of action. And it is the qualities of strength, discipline, and commitment that we discussed earlier that are part of a true new beginning. And so the story is symbolizing that even within the I am of our consciousness, that we have different levels of guidance, maybe, that I guess is the way we could put that. So the Moses guidance is that saying, hey, come with me. I'm leading you towards something. And then when we get to that new beginning and we're ready for it, that Joshua type guidance says, okay, now it's time to enact that fifth principle, right? We've got to take some action here. We've got to be disciplined, and we have to make a commitment that this new beginning is something that is truly our soul's desire, and we're willing to back that up with some discipline and some right action and some forward movement. Because, we always talk about at Unity that you can't, you shouldn't say you can't, that it is, everything is possible, and there is some action that is required. If we just sit in our living rooms in a lotus position and meditate and manifest, it is not as likely that people are just going to knock on our door and say, here, I have a gift for you, and it's everything you've ever wanted, right? So there's some level of us needing to put action out into the world. We have to see that that is a new beginning that we desire to have. We have to feel that within our soul. And then when those opportunities come to us, we have to take action within them and move forward, or we're not truly co-creating with our divine spirit. We're just sitting and expecting things to be dropped in our laps. And that's not, it's not always how spirit works. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it does seemingly seem like things are just dropped in our laps that we've been desiring. And that's great. But then there's usually, even when they're dropped in our laps, there's usually some form of well, then we have to take some actions to keep that in our lives or as part of our consciousness. He also goes on to make a distinction between Joshua and Jesus. And so he says that because in certain languages, Joshua and Jesus, those names have very similar meanings. And so he says that while Joshua and Jesus were both leaders who took followers into a new territory, Joshua is that expression of the I Am who leads us in a more physical sense. And so that's where that commitment and discipline and action comes in the physical realm. And that he leads his people into the promised land or a new beginning in that way. Whereas Jesus is represented for us as the fullest expression of the I Am and is leading in a more spiritual sense. So he leads us to the kingdom of heaven and the ultimate new beginning, which is the awareness that we are one with God and therefore spiritual beings having a human experience. So we've talked a lot about these different stages of transition, and we talked about that in the beginning as being recognizing that it's a natural process and that there's no right or wrong way to move through this, but that it's maybe helpful to have an understanding that it is normal and part of our human experience to move through these stages. And kind of some of what we've already talked about this morning is when you are recognizing that you're always supported by spirit no matter where you are in those stages, that's what makes all the difference. And that's kind of where Burnett goes for ending his discussion on finding ourselves in transition. Is, he says, is it possible to find anything permanent in a world that is continuously changing? And so, we often, make that comment that the only constant is change in our lives. And so he says, the desire for stability and security is a fundamental human drive. That is part of our humanness, to want some stability and security. And that what happens, though, is we often in our humanness try to satisfy this by attempting to cling to people, possessions, roles, or titles, But deep inside, we know that that is really it's like building a sandcastle close to the tide, right? We know that it is fleeting. We're really buying time against the inevitable. We're really taking up space and doing things that even in the moment, we have some awareness that it's not permanent, it's not stable, because there is change all around us, but we're trying to exert some kind of control over that. And so he says there's always that inner voice that is telling us that there must be something that is changeless. And he talks about that, we've discussed several paradoxes along the way. We talked about, every ending is a new beginning. Those are things, we hear that. Or to find ourselves, we must first lose ourselves. There's all the memes, right? There's the memes, and people say that. And so he says the last paradox that he thinks we need to discuss is that by fully surrendering to the process of change, we discover that which never changes. And that we're surrendering to the ever-changing reality of our world, discovering a changeless reality beneath and beyond the phenomenal world. And so this is surrendering to the process of change, and we've talked about this in other classes, and Sue's talked about, these are things like terms that we may have heard, like non-resistance or acceptance, non-attachment. That's what we're really talking about here, is the way in which we meet the moments and experiences of our lives. And so it's not, we've talked about before that non-attachment is not a detachment from everything in the human realm. It's the knowing that it is not the thing underneath that is changeless, right? It's you can enjoy the things that you're experiencing in this human experience. You can create and co-create magnificent and wonderful things within your physical reality to enjoy while you're here. But the non-attachment is that always having the knowing that that is not the core of who you are. That is not what your worth is tied to. That is not how favor of the divine is shown and all of those things. It is simply enjoying the gifts that we've been granted in this human reality, because we know that there is a connection that is deeper than all of those things, that is guiding us and co-creating with us to give us this experience.
Well, and I was just going to say, it's probably the best bet to surrender to the process of change, because everything is always changing. Every relationship that you have is always temporary. It's all, and eternal. So that's the paradox. And when you were talking about this, I was thinking about a book. So in my 20s, I got very sick. Doctors were like, yeah, we're going to have to take out, organs, and you're going to have to go on dialysis. And I was like, I don't know if I want to take that route. And I read a book called, the author was John Harrison, and it was called Love Your Disease. And in the book, he was talking about how the disease itself is what, that is evidence of your body wanting to be healthy. And in the process of being able to accept even that part, even the pain that was associated with it, even the symptoms that I had, I really believe that was a huge catalyst. I did a lot of things, but a huge catalyst to my own healing. And I did so many things, like, at this point, was it the affirmations? Was it, all of the other things? I don't know what it was in the end, but I know it wasn't surgery, because I didn't want to do that. And I'm still around 18 years later. So, but yeah, everything is always changing. That is the nature of this realm and this reality. And everything's all eternal. But we have to accept that process of change and accept everything that's coming in, because it's all supporting us. It's not just some ethereal spirit, at least in my opinion. It's not just some ethereal spirit that's supporting us always. Everything in this reality is always supporting us, even when it seems like it's conflict, even when it seems like it's, that too is supporting the evolution that is taking place in our own consciousness and the evolution that's taking place on the planet.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. I think he saw me bend over. I found this in the parking lot this morning, and it seems appropriate. I give full and free expression to my divine self, and my life is made perfect. And that's when you're giving full and free expression, you're surrendering.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting that come from within you and come out. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so he says it's to be open in a deep way, allowing ourselves to feel fully, and it's living fully in the now moment. So, he says when we're fully surrendered in a way that's connected to our higher self, and he reminds us that being surrendered does not mean that you're a doormat for other people or for life in general. Surrendering doesn't mean just going, I surrender and then I'm now floating around and I don't have direction, right? He said it's that surrendering to that knowing and that non-attachment and all of those things that we were just talking about, and that when we do that, we naturally begin to behave in ways that are beneficial to ourselves and those around us, and we start to gain more consciousness in all areas of our life. And I think that's where, I look around to people that I know have been doing the work for a long time and really sitting into the work of becoming who they are meant to be and gaining that connection to consciousness. And I think that is some of the greatest evidence I have seen of people surrendering to that higher self and then seeing things just come into alignment. And so that is where, when we're in that alignment, that is where things sometimes seemingly fall into our laps, right? Because what we don't even fully understand, or maybe they do fully understand, but like what's happening is you're so in alignment with like co-creation and desires and moving towards that higher self, that things just fall into place in the path that gets you there, and it becomes a little less arduous than it maybe was before you surrendered to that connection. And that's what he's saying too, is that we're not trying to control or orchestrate the flow of life. We're just allowing it to unfold. Sorry, my cursor has disappeared. Is it over there? Maybe there we go. Man, it got off the page there.
That's why I make mine big and bright yellow.
So anyway, so he says we're not trying to control or orchestrate the flow of life. We're allowing it to unfold. We trust that our desires are heard and we act when guided. And so we're spending less time maybe desperately looking for the signs and instead just recognizing them when they present themselves. And so there's a part earlier in where he talks about that with signs, and I know we've had those conversations here at Unity as well, that they come in lots of different forms, right? It could be a conversation you had with someone, it could be an affirmation that someone dropped in the parking lot that you picked up, it could be getting in your car and a song is playing and the lyrics just really tap into something that you're going through. It could be a literal sign that you see. It could be a multitude of things, and I think we have probably all experienced some of those signs along the way, and being surrendered is recognizing them when they happen. I know Sue's told the story before, of the person that there's a flood and they've had to climb up on top of their house, and someone comes by in a boat and says, "Oh, hey, come on, you want to get in the boat?" And he says, "No, God is going to save me. I'm waiting for God to save me." And then along comes a helicopter and they say, "Come on, climb up the ladder." No, I'm waiting. God is going to save me. Like, all of these things come, and then the person dies and goes into the other plane and says, "Oh, what? Why did you forsake me? What?" He said, "Man, I sent a boat and a helicopter, and I sent all these things to save you, and you refused them all." And so that's when we're not surrendered. We're refusing the lifeboats, right? Sometimes they're coming, they're right in our face. But if we're not surrendered to this connection and this knowing that everything is there to support us, and we're not recognizing the gifts of grace that come through this higher guidance, then we're pushing that away and heading back out into the wilderness for 40 years because we weren't ready to see it.
Yeah, it's like we're so attached to it needs to happen a certain way that we can't let go of that, and we miss it. And that's like Sue's always saying, get out of the how. Just accept that it's going to be okay, and when it comes, then you'll recognize it.
Surrendering is actually setting an intention. What we go forward into is what our intentions are. And if you intend to move forward, then you're going to be surrendered. Or you're going to intend to go with the process. And intentions are one of the strongest motivators that we have. And that's what guides us. And when we have that intention that we are trusting the process, then we're going to see the signs. And we're going to be able to follow them. Because we're going to know ourselves.
I had an Al-Anon sponsor who used to always say, "What's your motivation?" When I would tell her I wanted to do something. And she'd say, "What's your motivation?" Dang it. My motivation is I want her to be angry and be in pain like I am. That's my motivation. And then, you say it out loud and you go, "Well, crap, that's lousy." And then you can't do it, so.
Right.
You still can, but...
You can. And then you feel bad about it, yeah. So, I was listening to Michael Singer today, and, many beings that talk about how process in terms of relationship, and I realized how much I identify my life value and my personal value according to whoever's reflecting me, whether it's my job or the relationship, or the people at church or whatever, So for me, that surrendering process has a whole lot to do with taking my eyes off of other people and how what they see me, the mirror, instead of looking in your mirror of me, just letting that be your business, And so that's been a core part of the surrendering process for me is the other people part,
That's
Yeah. Well, and that's, we kind of started this discussion talking about, how our society has mechanized things and also has created, those messages are all around us to take our value from what other people think of us, yes, or to take our value from the role, the title that we are given, or the roles that we are in. And all of that, again, it's part of this human experience. And so we're not calling it bad. We're just saying that, he's pointing out that in this trusting the process of change, it is often those thoughts and beliefs that trip us up in this, because we're not as connected to that divine center as we could be. And that's how we find our way back often.
I'm taking an online class by Jeffrey Allen, and he's done 2 meditations that have been so incredibly profound. One of them is you go to a room in your head and you look at what's there. And before that, he takes you into the Akashic Records, where you know that everything that has ever happened is that's the universe's way of managing things. And so you know that you can tap into that. So there's nothing that you need to hold on to. And so he has you completely clear the room and dump everything down the drain into the earth, which can handle it. And then he has you look around the room and see all the people and line them all up. Look at the ones behind you that are hiding. Line them all up and open the door and escort them out. Because he said, this is your room and you're the only one that is allowed to be there if you choose that. Because you choose to have your space. And so you completely clear this room out. And that process was astounding. And then he goes on to tell you that you have seniority in your life. And I've never heard that term applied. But we have the seniority in our life. And anything else that comes in, we have allowed and given away our seniority to. And so it gives you a whole different total perspective of life. You have the seniority. You choose. And in the energy realm, you always have the seniority in your life. And it just changes your life to go through that and think about that. And it's just astounding how when you clear that space, what it does in your head and how it changes you.
Nice. And so, with all of this that we're talking about, sitting into this, this flow of life and this knowing, he says that's where we see the true quality of our experience is not dependent on those external circumstances. The veil of that kind of lifts, and we're able to see that there's no need to be concerned as much with what's happened in the past or what will happen in the future, that we just embrace this now moment. And then I was thinking last night as I went back through, this kept coming up, embracing the now moment, being in the flow, all of that. And I think how many teachers are expressing right now with this message of be present now, be in the now moment. I think Eckhart Tolle and just so many people that their expression right now is to bring this message of living from the now moment. And that was perhaps more in the forefront of my mind right now as well. I think some of you know, I'll just briefly share. I had a coworker and a dear friend who suddenly passed in a car accident 2 weeks ago. And, we had so many plans for what was going to be, right? We had all these plans of things that were going to happen at work and all the things. And she left the office on a Monday afternoon saying, okay, we'll talk about that more tomorrow. We'll get back to that tomorrow. See you guys in the morning. It didn't come back in the morning. And now I find myself sitting and thinking back through some of those conversations that we were having leading up to her passing, and realizing how truly unimportant half of it was. Like, it wasn't, we were spending time in the weeds of things that in the grand scheme of things matter not. And, I find myself only thinking, man, if we could have been enjoying the now moment more, that is what would be more meaningful. Yeah.
My name's Cody. I just lost a good friend too, about 2 weeks ago. and he died of cancer. But you bringing that up just makes me have so much faith that he's in heaven and that he's my friend. His name was Tom, and he passed away. But I see this couple here is giving birth to new life. So our world's a little strange, where you go from last week one of my friend dies, but then the next day someone born and lives, and lives long.
Yeah. And I think, we all, those of us who've been moving through that grief and through everything, one of the things that's been said a lot in the last 2 weeks is, she gave us the gift of the reminder not to take a day for granted, not to take, to be in the now moment with people when you're having the conversation. And so, my workplace can be very busy and stressful, and it can be really heavy. And we all get kind of bogged down in that. And what we've done over the last 2 weeks is been more compassionate with each other. And we have acknowledged that sometimes what seems important as the 40-hour-a-week work that we've been assigned to do is not as important as the internal work of taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other. And anyway, so I'm counting that as the gift. I'm counting that as the reminder to surrender to that higher power and to be more fully in the now moment, because that's all that really matters in the end, right? Because we don't know when this now moment will be the last now moment that we get to spend with people. And so we end with, he says, surrendering to the flow of life, the divine plan, we eventually find a new sense of peace and a new source of power. So we'll experience this. I just thought this was beautiful. So we will experience the dance of life unfolding with less grasping and attachment and less suffering. Gradually, we will begin to see that we are not living our life, but rather our life is being lived through us. Life takes on a flow, a rhythm, and a synchronicity. This is where we find profound trust in the innate wisdom and goodness of the natural process of evolution or divine plan. It is where we encounter that which never changes and meet our true self. So that concludes our discussion of trusting the process of change. So James has our announcements.
Yeah. And then now, it's where everything is happening. Isn't it great? So the announcements. Applications for team director will close at noon today. So you have 2 hours. If you want to talk to Dee, find out what you're doing, put your resume together. And when we do this announcement this afternoon, or later today, probably have 15, 20 minutes to do that. Friday, June 30th at 6 p.m., Bobby Delmar hosts Diversity Game Night. This event is open to everyone to attend. Next Sunday at 9:15 in the New Thought World Religion class, we have Greg Lee finishing his presentation, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. The July Friendship Sunday next week, July 2nd, will be an ice cream social in lieu of a potluck. Spirit Explorers is coming up July 10th through 13th. And we are looking for volunteers, and I don't know, is Jen doing a sign-up? It doesn't really say here. It says Jen is doing this announcement. But yeah, and we're also seeking, we're also looking for people to register their children for that as well. So, yeah. And I guess that's it.
Okay. Well, sir, thank you for